Welcome to the Crime Story channel. Today, I bring you a chilling and haunting story, the most notorious female serial killer in the world, the death shift of a nurse who spread death to dozens of newborns. With the nickname Angel of Death, Genene Jones became a female serial killer responsible for a series of shocking newborn deaths in Texas, USA. If you find this story intriguing, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to give us more motivation to create even more exciting content for you. Now, let's dive into the story. Scene 1, the beginning of the death shift. Imagine a hospital, a place meant to heal, where every breath and every heartbeat is meant to be safeguarded, not extinguished. But what if the one person you trust the most, the one tasked with caring for your most vulnerable loved ones, was the very one who brought them harm? This is the chilling story of Genene Jones, a nurse who earned the dark title of the Angel of Death. In 1981, Genene began her role as a nursing trainee at the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, NICU, at Bexar County Hospital, located in San Antonio, Texas. This unit, designed to be a sanctuary for critically ill newborns, soon became ground zero for a string of mysterious deaths. It wasn't long before a troubling pattern began to emerge. Over the span of just 1 year, more than 60 children died under strange and unexplained circumstances, and the unsettling fact was, most of these deaths occurred during Genene's night shifts. Between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., the death toll soared, so much so that these hours became ominously referred to as the death shift. The numbers didn't lie. The pattern was too consistent to be ignored. What was happening during those hours when the hospital was quieter? Babies who seemed to be stable, even improving, suddenly stopped breathing or experienced cardiac arrest. Some died shortly after receiving fluids, others showed signs of internal bleeding. With each death, suspicion grew, but no one could fathom the truth yet. Scene 2, the growing suspicion. At first, the deaths at Bexar County Hospital seemed like nothing more than tragic coincidences. But as the number of newborns dying under Genene's care continued to rise, something became unmistakably clear: these were no accidents. Babies who had appeared healthy and stable suddenly stopped breathing or suffered heart failure after routine procedures like receiving fluids. Some displayed uncontrollable bleeding, even from the slightest injuries. The medical staff was baffled what was causing these strange and unexplainable deaths. As the incidents mounted, the doctors began to talk among themselves, comparing their notes and observations. They started to notice a disturbing pattern: these deaths occurred consistently during Genene's shifts. The more they discussed the cases, the more it became clear that Genene seemed to be at the center of it all. But even with their growing suspicions, they had no concrete evidence linking her to the deaths. It was a maddening situation. Something was wrong, but they couldn't prove it. The tension among the medical staff grew as they quietly whispered about the possibility of her involvement. Meanwhile, the hospital leadership, aware of the escalating whispers, struggled to handle the situation. Firing Genene or reporting the suspicious deaths to the authorities could ruin the hospital's reputation. To avoid drawing attention to the growing scandal, they took the less confrontational route. They suggested transferring Genene to another department or even to a different hospital altogether. Their hope was that this move would calm things down, but it only deepened the mystery and heightened the suspicion. Despite this attempt to cover things up, the doctors who had witnessed these tragic events were now more certain than ever: something sinister was happening, and Genene Jones was at the center of it all. Yet, without the evidence they needed, they were left in a state of frustration, unsure of how to stop the growing horror that seemed to follow her every step. Scene 3, the resignation and the drop in deaths. Sensing the growing suspicion surrounding her, Genene Jones made a chilling decision. She chose to resign from her position at Bexar County Hospital. It seemed like a simple exit, a chance to leave behind the growing tension and rumors that had begun to swirl around her. But what happened next was far from ordinary. After Genene's departure, something strange occurred: the number of infant deaths at the hospital dropped dramatically. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted. The medical staff, who had been watching with suspicion, were now more certain than ever Genene had been involved in the deaths. For the doctors, this wasn't just coincidence. They had seen enough. The number of unexplained fatalities had coincided with her shifts, and now, with her gone, the deaths had stopped. Without Genene, the hospital felt eerily calm. The unsettling realization sank in: she had been the cause of the mysterious deaths all along. But despite the doctor's suspicions and the stark contrast in death rates, hospital leaders did nothing. They had no solid evidence to confirm their worst fears, and without that, they were unwilling to take action. The deaths remained unexplained, and Genene left the hospital with a growing cloud of suspicion hanging over her. What they didn't realize, though, was that this wasn't the end of her deadly path. Her resignation might have appeared as a closure to the mystery for the hospital, but in reality, it was only the beginning of an even darker chapter. Genene would continue her deadly journey, leaving more victims in her wake, and the true scale of her crimes would take time to surface. Scene 4, the second hospital and more deaths. After resigning from Bexar County Hospital, Genene Jones didn't fade into obscurity. She didn't stop. Instead, she moved on to another hospital in Kerrville, a small town just outside San Antonio, Texas, as if starting fresh. It was an opportunity to leave behind the shadows of suspicion and rebuild her career. But death followed her there too, as if it had become her shadow, trailing her wherever she went. At her new job, the same strange and disturbing events began to unfold. Healthy babies, brought in for routine care or vaccinations, suddenly became gravely ill. They would start showing symptoms of severe distress, and despite the best efforts of the hospital staff, many of them died. The pattern was eerie. There was no logical explanation for the rapid decline of these otherwise healthy infants. The babies had no known illnesses before their visits, yet after receiving vaccinations or routine procedures, they would fall critically ill and die. Something was wrong, but no one could put their finger on what it was. For the medical staff, this was baffling. It seemed like another string of tragedies, but no one was able to make the connection. Genene appeared to be an excellent, trusted nurse just like at Bexar County, but the deaths continued to happen on her shifts. Yet, once again, there was no direct evidence linking her to the deaths. The unexplainable deaths that occurred under her care sparked whispers among the staff, but as was the case before, there were no clear signs, no smoking gun. Genene's deadly habits seemed to have returned, and the pattern felt too similar to be ignored. But once again, without proof, the staff and doctors were left powerless. The deadly path Genene had carved at Bexar County had followed her to Kerrville, but the mystery only deepened. Scene 5, the final victim and investigation. Then came Chelsea McClellan, a 15-month-old girl who was brought into the hospital for a routine vaccination. What should have been a simple and harmless procedure turned into a tragedy. Genene Jones, once again, was the one administering the shots. But this time, she didn't just administer the usual vaccine. She injected 3 doses of succinylcholine, a powerful muscle relaxant that can temporarily paralyze the body's motor functions. The effects were immediate and deadly. Chelsea's heart stopped almost instantly. Chelsea's death was different. It wasn't just another unexplained tragedy. This time, the medical staff couldn't dismiss it as a coincidence. The timing, the method, and the circumstances made it impossible to ignore. It was clear to everyone that something far more sinister was at play. The hospital staff quickly recognized that this wasn't a case of medical misfortune, it was the result of deliberate action. With Chelsea's death, the investigation took a decisive turn. The police, who had long suspected foul play, now had the evidence they needed. They began to dig deeper into Genene's past and discovered a chilling history of attempted murder. Investigators learned that Genene had previously tried to harm a 4-week-old baby using a dangerous anticoagulant, a substance that would have caused uncontrollable bleeding. Thankfully, that baby survived, but it was clear now that Genene had been playing a deadly game with the lives of vulnerable infants. The death of Chelsea McClellan provided the police with the final piece of evidence that tied Genene to these tragic events. The investigation had taken months, but now, the authorities had what they needed to finally charge Genene with the crimes she had committed. It was no longer just a series of coincidences, it was the work of a serial killer hiding behind the trusted uniform of a nurse. Scene 6, The Trial and Conviction. Genene Jones was arrested, and her trial began in October 1982. It was a case that stunned the nation. The question on everyone's mind wasn't just how she committed such heinous acts, but why? What drove a nurse, someone sworn to protect life, to harm so many innocent babies? As the trial unfolded, the courtroom was filled with an unsettling tension. Doctors, victims' families, and the public all waited for answers. During the trial, Genene's confession shocked everyone. She admitted to making babies dangerously ill, pushing them to the brink of death, only to later rescue them in an attempt to gain the admiration and praise of her colleagues. The reason behind her actions was chilling. She craved attention, and children were the perfect targets for her twisted need for recognition. Babies, helpless and entirely dependent on her, became her pawns in a sick game to satisfy her ego. On October 12, 1982, Genene Jones was convicted of intentional murder for the death of Chelsea McClellan, a crime that had finally exposed the extent of her twisted actions. She was sentenced to 99 years in prison for that one murder. However, despite the overwhelming suspicions from doctors and staff, the court could not definitively link her to the other deaths that had occurred. The evidence wasn't enough to charge her with the full scale of the horror she had caused, even though the doctors were certain she was responsible for many more victims. The trial had revealed the terrifying reality of Genene's motives. She was driven by a need for admiration, not revenge, not money, but a sick desire for recognition. It wasn't just about the lives she ended, it was about her satisfaction in being seen as a hero in the midst of tragedy. Scene 7, The Motive and the Monster Behind the Mask. What angered people the most about Genene Jones was the chilling truth behind her motives. She craved admiration, a twisted need to be seen as a hero. It wasn't about vengeance or financial gain. No, for Genene, the power lay in creating chaos and then stepping in to save the victims, all in a desperate bid to gain gratitude and recognition from her colleagues. She would deliberately push her young patients to the brink of death and then, in her mind, be the one to rescue them, earning praise for her supposed heroism. Her cold confession during the trial left everyone in shock. No one could fathom how someone in a position of trust, someone sworn to protect life, could carry out such unthinkable acts of murder. But Genene revealed the sick truth behind her actions. She wasn't motivated by revenge, jealousy, or hatred. Her desire for attention was the driving force behind every tragic death she caused. The innocent lives lost in her wake were nothing more than pawns in her dangerous game for recognition. As Genene sat there in the courtroom, facing a jury that struggled to comprehend the extent of her crimes, it became clear, she had used her role as a nurse, someone who was supposed to save lives, to carry out her grotesque plan. What had been concealed behind the trustworthy mask of a healthcare worker was the face of a predator, someone willing to destroy the very lives they were entrusted to protect for the sake of sick, personal satisfaction. Her confession was more than disturbing. It was a revelation that shattered the illusion of a caring, compassionate nurse. Genene wasn't just a killer, she was a manipulative, cold-hearted individual whose need for admiration had turned her into one of the most notorious serial killers in Texas. Scene 8, A Legacy of Horror. Genene Jones remains one of the most notorious female serial killers in history, and her actions, carried out under the guise of a trusted nurse, have left a permanent mark on the world. What makes her story even more horrifying is how she was able to hide in plain sight for so long, working in a noble profession that people trusted to protect life. Behind the sterile walls of hospitals, She used her role to carry out her disturbing desires, her dark need for admiration, while others blindly trusted her to care for their most vulnerable loved ones. The chilling reality is that Genene Jones was able to manipulate and deceive for years, leaving behind a trail of innocent victims, all the while posing as a compassionate healthcare worker. Her actions were shockingly effective, and the investigations that eventually followed revealed the depth of her depravity. But even as the truth came to light, the damage had already been done. The families of the children she murdered would never get closure, and the horror of what happened will never be forgotten. Her legacy serves as a chilling reminder of just how fragile trust can be, especially when it's placed in the hands of those we believe are there to protect us. Genene's crimes are a grim example of how the very institutions meant to heal and protect can sometimes harbor the most dangerous individuals. And for the families who lost their children, the truth behind Genene's murderous path continues to haunt them, reminding us all that sometimes, the greatest danger lies within the places we trust the most. Scene 9, Conclusion. Genene Jones was a monster in disguise, a trusted nurse who used her position in the healthcare system to bring death and suffering to the very people who trusted her, the most innocent babies. Her crimes didn't just end lives, they shattered the trust placed in one of the most revered professions. Her actions have left a lasting impact on both the world of healthcare and law enforcement, and her story continues to haunt us. How could someone who was meant to heal and protect the vulnerable betray that trust so utterly? The horror of it all is still felt to this day, as we try to understand how someone so close to the care of life could have committed such unspeakable acts. Genene's case is a stark reminder that not every nurse, doctor, or person in a position of care is who they seem. Some wear the mask of a hero, someone people look to for safety and protection, but underneath that mask lies the capacity for unimaginable evil. Her story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that not all those who occupy positions of trust are there to protect us. Some have darker intentions, and the consequences can be devastating. As we reflect on Genene Jones' legacy, we are reminded of the vulnerabilities in our most trusted institutions and the shocking potential for betrayal that can exist in even the most unexpected places.